Thanks, Manisha. And hi, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your lunch break to come talk about the anatomy of a tweet. This is one of the strangest academic talks I've ever done because it's not actually in my core area of expertise, but maybe it's not so strange because it is about something that I consider to be part of my academic mission and something that I do a lot and which I think has been very effective in getting my work out and also the word out about a lot of things that I care about, both academically and just generally in life. So I'm going to talk to you about the anatomy of a tweet. Essentially, what Manisha has asked me to do is dissect a few tweets that I have tweeted and talk about why I tweeted them and what message I was trying to get out and what kind of reactions I've got and my philosophy, the philosophy that I bring to tweeting. But before I get to the anatomy of a tweet, I'd like to talk about why Twitter and why I tweet, just to sort of give some context to the discussion of the actual tweets that I'm going to look at. But I'd like to start off first by acknowledging where I work from. I am at home working virtually for obvious reasons. But as many of you know, I work for the University of Alberta, and my home is located in Edmonton. And both the University of Alberta and my home, where I'm working from right now, are on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. And I respectfully acknowledge where I'm situated. And I would encourage you as well to, when you contribute to the discussion today, to quickly mention where you're joining from and to also provide a land acknowledgement. It's not mandatory, of course, but if you are minded to, please do share your acknowledgement. So why Twitter? I am going to assume that many, if not all, who are on this forum today have a Twitter account, or at least know what Twitter is. So I'm not going to tell you what Twitter is. I think Twitter should be obvious to anyone and to everyone what it is. Except unless, of course, you've been living under a rock, you should know what Twitter is. So I'm not going to talk about what Twitter is, but I'm going to tell you about why I tweet and the reason why I think Twitter is a good tool for doing what I do. Now, I started tweeting. I joined Twitter and started tweeting because it was social media, and I like social media as a way of engaging with other people. But over time, it became really clear to me that it's a very effective tool for actually doing academic work. Now, I see myself as a bench to bedside scholar. That's I suppose, the word phrase that should be familiar to anyone who's in the sciences. But the idea is that I see myself as someone who doesn't just live in the so-called ivory tower. All the work I do and the work I've always done has always been positioned to be public facing. So I produce scholarship in various forms that with the goal of reaching not just my colleagues in academia and people who are able to interpret academic work or have that ability to do so, but I also produce things for public consumption, for just the lay public to understand the kind of work I'm doing. Before Twitter, I did this in a variety of ways, but mainly using things like opinion editorials in newspapers, by doing public events. I've done a number of philosophers' cafes around the city where members of the lay public come in and I invite experts and we talk about issues of the day. I also have done things like that I call fast facts, which will be summaries of facts relating to a particular topical issue, which through the Health Law Institute that I'm affiliated with and the University of Alberta will distribute those fast facts or put them up on our website. And Twitter really was in many ways a game changer with respect to being able to reach a lot more people. I've been able to communicate messages coming out of my work much quicker, much more effectively, and with greater or wider reach. And so that's what Twitter has become for me, essentially, is a tool for academic engagement with the lay public, or with just the general public, not just the lay public. I also have other academic colleagues following me on Twitter, as well as experts, of course, who are on Twitter who read the tweets. But not even beyond just communicating. It's, I use the term engagement rather than communication, because it allows you to engage with people, allows you to have them respond to your ideas, challenge them, critique them, and have the kinds of discussions that will often happen in the halls of the academy can also happen on Twitter. But I think at a much more sort of exponential rate and much quicker. And I see that as a very good thing. So that's essentially why I use Twitter, and that's why I like Twitter as a tool for academic engagement. But there are other events too that I think have made Twitter even more relevant than many other social media forums. So things like the Arab Spring, I don't know if you guys recall the Arab Spring, that showed the power of Twitter to be a way of mobilizing people to actually bring about change in our world. And that was a big motivator for me, just seeing people organize themselves on Twitter and carry out what they've talked about on Twitter to bring about effective change in society. That was a big motivator for me, especially in the current political climate in Alberta. I'm somebody who sees myself as being staunchly in opposition to this government and their policies, and Twitter has been very effective for allowing me to sort of engage with the government in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if it didn't exist. But I also worry about sort of the loss or lack of activism in our society. I'm not going to, say too much about this, but it's something we can talk about during the discussion period. I just think there's little to no activism in our society, at least not on a continuing basis. I grew up in Nigeria, and that was a society where there was always a lot of people organizing and being activists and challenging ideas in society. I see a lot less of it in Canadian society. I think it might actually be frowned upon culturally. People think you're doing something strange. For example, I was involved in a protest against the decision from the province to eliminate the trace and isolate, testing, tracing, and isolating for COVID. And I met a lot of people at that protest, which happened at legislature grounds, who said that this was their first protest they've ever been to. And so I think Twitter is a very good tool for activism. That's the reason why I like it, because it is less involved than trying to plan a protest, but it can actually reach a lot of people. As I mentioned to Manisha just before we came on, I have about 23,000 followers on Twitter. I have never had that many people follow me in real life. I don't know I'm going to find 23,000 people to listen to me at any point in time. And many of my tweets are seen by hundreds of thousands of people. So I think Twitter is really a good way to reach a lot of people with ideas that, of course, they can challenge and critique. The last thing I'll say about why I tweet is that it's actually been a very effective tool for me for media engagement. About 99% of my media work that I do today is through Twitter. It's just members of the media contacting me when they see a tweet. And so Twitter is the way of amplifying the message as well, because when they contact me, I then get to go on TV or radio and share those ideas. And it all starts from Twitter, and it's been very effective. I used to book my media engagements through the university, or through a colleague saying you should contact Ubaka. But now the number of media work that I do has increased exponentially, and much of it is through Twitter. Okay, so that's why I use Twitter, and we can talk more about it during the discussion portion of this what are we calling it, a workshop? Okay, so On this slide, I've kind of laid out sort of the structure of a tweet and what I think a tweet is meant to do. Of course, there could be other things that a tweet can do, but for me, these are sort of the core things that I think you should be aware of when you decide you want to tweet. You want to tweet in a way that is purposeful. There has to be meaning imbued and embedded in what you're tweeting, and you have to be able to communicate a message. And so meaning is very important to me when I tweet. I usually, in terms of my process, will think of a focus, think of ways to express myself, and think of the meaning I want to convey. I hardly ever tweet without a purpose behind it. It doesn't matter how the tweet comes across. There is something I'm trying to do. It could be that I'm trying to be provocative. It could be that I'm trying to get people to laugh. It could be that I'm trying to communicate a very serious message about something with humor, but there's always something, some kind of meaning behind my tweet. And as I've said before, I think Twitter promotes dialogue. It's not just communication, but engagement. It allows me to, check my own assumptions, to test them, to have people challenge them, and to challenge the assumptions that others make, as well as to increasingly correct disinformation and misinformation. And then the last bit is reaction management. To be on Twitter, you have to be brave. You have to be willing to take the good, the bad, and the ugly. You will get some people agreeing with your ideas, and you get praise for those ideas, but you also get a lot of people criticizing them. The criticism is not something that anyone should shy away from. As an academic, I accept that criticism is fundamentally part of what I do. And if you're going to be a public-facing academic, you should accept criticism as part of that role. So that I'm not fussed about that. I actually welcome it. But of course, there's the ugly, where people go beyond the pale and throw insults your way. In my case, I've had death threats and all kinds of things. I've had people email me or call me. I've had to take my email and phone off the internet, so I don't do that anymore. But Twitter increasingly is starting to provide tools that allow you to manage that reaction. I block a lot of people. If you come out of the gate with insults and with racist taunts, I'm just going to block you. But the one thing I've learned from tweeting all these years is you really have to not take anything personally. You have to be able to know when not to engage, and that's key. You don't have to respond to everything. Sometimes it's actually just easier to just block it or to just mute it. My rule for engaging is that if you're somebody who's influencing a lot of people and you're communicating something that I think is misinformation, I will engage with you. Or if you're communicating ideas that I think should be critiqued, I should engage with you. So that will include politicians. If you're a politician, naturally, you're going to get a response from me if you tweet something. If you're a public official, you're going to get a response from me if you tweet something that I think is not conveying the message that it should be conveying. But generally speaking, I don't respond to trolls. It's just easier to block them. And, you have to take care of your mental health and not react to everything that happens online. Okay. Yeah, I think I have 5 more minutes. So let me dive into a couple of tweets just to give you a sense. So to do the real anatomy of a tweet, let me give you a sense of what I was thinking when I tweeted these ones out and what I was trying to communicate and the reaction that I got to it. So for this tweet, which I'm going to give you just a second to read. This came about because I was reflecting on the past year and a half and how in all of that time, we've had to change the ways that we basically respond to everything, including work, all because we want to stay engaged and be able to make a living and contribute to society. And as I was reflecting on this, the thing that really triggered this was the fact that my employer, the University of Alberta, did not seem to be responding to the commitment that people like me have made to keep the institution running by taking basic steps to look out for our safety and our health. And even when they did, they seem to be thinking about it as if we're just employees who don't have lives beyond our contributions to the university. So I have a family, I have a wife and 2 daughters, and I don't think of myself without thinking about them. My life is essentially intertwined with theirs. And the university's policies seem to be treating me as somebody who lives alone and only has to care for myself. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just occurred to me that the university wasn't thinking of whole lives and many connections we have in our lives, and how not having good and safe policies to address COVID could affect our lives viewed from in this holistic manner. And so that imbalance between the contributions that people have made to keep their workplaces going and whatever the employers' businesses going, and the reaction I was seeing from many employers with respect to how they plan to deal with the return to the workplace made me tweet this. And it was just, to encourage people to understand that work has a place in our lives, but it shouldn't consume our lives. That we really have to think about it as a balance, and learn to leave it behind and focus on other things that make us happy. Now, I wanted to communicate this message, but I wanted to make it very relatable. And that's one thing about the tweets that I write, is that I want them to be relatable. I want it to be not the voice of an academic, but to be the voice of someone who actually is just a human being who understands what people might be going through. So that was the motivation for this tweet. It's a very simple tweet, just saying, try and get some balance in your life. This is a philosophy that I actually adopted in my life and towards my work. I don't work on weekends for the most part. I don't check emails beyond 5 o'clock. Initially, when I started working as an academic, I worked round the clock. And when I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore, I thought there was going to be some kind of loss in my productivity. But actually, my productivity went up, because when I decide to work, I'm really dialed in, and I know when I'm stopping. So I'm trying to get as much work as I can done. But I also incorporated one thing into my work arsenal, which is being able to say no. I say no a lot. I don't shy away from saying no, and I do have the privilege of doing that. I don't work on a factory floor, for example, where I don't work as a doctor or as a nurse. Where I couldn't just say no to a patient if I was a doctor. I couldn't go, no, I'm not treating you. Or I couldn't go, no, I'm not answering this call, and I'm not coming into work. But I do have the privilege to say no in my work, and I've tried to use that as much as possible. I have a sense of my limits, and I've built in other aspects of my life that I enjoy into my plan for how I spend my day. So I was just trying to communicate that. And as you can see, this resonated with quite a number of people. There's quite a bit of retweets, and they were all positive, and as well as a lot of likes. And if you dig deeper into the stats on this, it was seen by over 250,000 people, and it had over 40,000 impressions. So it was a tweet that people could relate to. And then there's this one. So about 50% of the tweets that I write are political. That's probably not true. Maybe like 90% of my tweets are political tweets. And the thing about political tweets is that you have to really, at least for me, I feel like you have to be really careful about how you convey them. You have to make sure that the message gets through, and that it's an effective message. You have to, of course, make sure that you're respectful, even though that is hard sometimes. And I must admit that I failed in this a few times. But more importantly, at least for me, it has to be relatable and humorous. It has to make people laugh, because I think humor and laughter allow people to sort of ease into not just enjoying the tweet, but understanding its message. So this tweet, just to give you some background, is a tweet that I wrote as a critique of the Justice Minister's policy, where he had decided that the way to deal with hate attacks on Albertans is to ask the federal government to create an exception in the criminal code to allow people to carry pepper spray. So to allow those who suffer from hate and racist attacks to carry pepper spray to defend themselves. I wrote a number of tweets against this idea, which I think is quite ridiculous for reasons I won't go into. It's just nonsensical, and it was rightly rejected by the federal government. But as many of you know, the Justice Minister is a Nigerian, is the first Black person to be appointed a minister in Alberta. And as the Minister of Justice, he holds a very important position in the cabinet. And in my view, he's supposed to be a model. You know, he broke the glass ceiling, but he was supposed to be a model of representation. And I think he's failed in this regard. And so this tweet I wrote just to point out the absurdity of what he had proposed, but also to make people laugh, but also to deal with something else that people didn't know, which is that I get a lot of pushback from Nigerians behind the scenes who think I shouldn't be attacking another Nigerian on Twitter. There's a lot of weird tribalism that happens behind the scenes where people call me up and go, well, we are one and you shouldn't critique him. And I always like to point out to them that if we were in Nigeria and it was a political leader, I'll critique him. I don't understand why I wouldn't do that in Canada. So this was a tweet I wrote to make people laugh, to alert them to the fact that what they see as all these things that I tweet about do have repercussions for me behind the scenes. And you know, whether or not I agree with the critiques I'm getting from Nigerians, it does lead to some loss of a community for me. And even dealing with it can be quite challenging, for lack of a better way to put that. But also I wanted to, more importantly, I wanted to draw attention to the absurdity of the idea of arming victims of hate-based attacks or racist attacks with pepper spray. And so I wrote this tweet and people loved it. You know, everyone that I spoke to, people actually will come up to me on the streets and go, that tweet, that was a very clever tweet. So I'm using this as just to sort of highlight the way that I tweet and what I think the meaning is behind my tweet. I think it was a very effective tweet because it kind of drew attention to how absurd it would be if I was actually allowed by law to pepper spray the minister. And it made people laugh because the image of me running around the city with pepper spray looking for the justice minister to pepper spray him because that was allowed by law, I think is one that is humorous, but also allowed me to share a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes with me and my Nigerian community in terms of the reaction to my tweets. So, you know, many of them will not come on Twitter to tell me, you know, stop it or don't do this, or even to react with insults, but they do call me up at home and challenge me to think differently about criticizing the Minister of Justice just because he's Nigerian. Okay, I'll stop talking now. I think I've taken up too much time, but that's what I have to share with you. And I think it's best to get into a discussion at this point, or to answer your questions, because I think we can dig deeper if I get to hear from you and hear your thoughts on what I've shared with you. But thank you. But one final thing I should say, these slides, if you're impressed by them, and if you think they're excellent slides, you really should thank Manisha. She put them together. We had a meeting where we talked about ideas for what I wanted to share. And I don't know if you noticed, Manisha just got out of bed because she worked till 3 a.m. And she still finds time to put together beautiful slides and organize things like this. So I want to just take a few seconds to thank her for the opportunity and for all the incredible work she's doing with Obliquity to highlight some of these issues and to bring a little bit of the humanities into medicine and the sciences. So thank you, Manisha.
Thank you. As Dr. Ogbogu said, feel free if you're comfortable sharing your question out loud, you can do that. You can also throw it in the chat box and I'm happy to read out questions. And then if we're not getting any, I can invent a few so we can have a bit of a discussion here. Okay, I'll ask my cardinal question that I asked you last time. So what advice would you give to people who are new to social media and or Twitter and want to start to become activists in their own fields? What advice would you give them to start that whole process?
It's always good to start with information that's accurate, accessible, and engaging. I think that's how I started. You want to build an audience first. So if you think about it like an academic talk, you don't come in with, criticism. You want to actually first of all share your ideas and share what you know. And many of my early tweets were just about providing information. I still do a lot of that. I think a majority of my tweets today are just about saying, this is what the law says. This is something I know from the work I do about the government's policy on A or B or C. So making sure that you start with information, you're providing information, and the information is accurate and timely and relevant and engaging. Everyone has a different style to tweeting, but whatever that style is, I think if you want to actually build an audience, you should inform people. People should want to come to read your tweets. And I get a lot of people emailing me saying, well, thank you for tweeting. We really get, we see your source of information on certain topics. And that's why we followed you on Twitter. And as you start to build an audience, then you can start sort of get a feel for how they receive your expression, and you can modify as you go along. In person, I am exactly a reflection of what my tweets suggest about me. My tweets are essentially how I talk in real life and how I engage with people. So it's not as if I'm making up something different from me, but initially, when I started tweeting, it was really just about, when I started tweeting about health law and science policy and politics, it was making sure that people got information from me because that's what they were looking to get from me at the time.
Awesome. We now have quite a few questions in the chat, so I'll read the first one from Lindsay. I'm curious if you could talk a bit about how you foster relationships and connection with those in your Twitter network.
Thanks, that's a great question. So in two main ways, there's sort of an informal network of Alberta Twitterers, or is that what we're going to call them, who we've come to know each other. I've never actually met these people in person, but we've come to know each other through Twitter. And it's come about from people with similar voices, tweeting about the same topics, just starting to talk to one another. So my DMs is where much of this happens. People, as we start, because we tweet about similar topics and, start to follow each other, we then have conversations in the DMs, similar to maybe meeting people up at a pub or something and having a drink and having a chat. So my DMs are actually so DM is direct messaging for those who are not on Twitter. My direct messaging with other people in my Twitter network is actually quite active. Some of these people I know from before, they're not just Twitter persons to me. So someone like Dr. Lorian Hardcastle, who's a colleague and friend at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law. We've known each other for a very long time. We did the PhD together at the University of Toronto Law School. But I think for the past 2 years or so, we basically maintain an active DM thing where we discuss. Sometimes if I tweet, I actually run things by her and I kind of talk through the information, make sure it's accurate before it goes out. I don't want to tweet information that's inaccurate, and we check each other that way. We make my tweets are not a reaction that just came about. They are planned. If I'm tweeting information, I want to make sure it's accurate. I want to make sure she provides sort of a soft peer review of the information, and I do that for her as well. And so the DMs are a good way of maintaining network. The second way is through offline engagements that bring people together. I think those test, trace, and isolate protests were really good for meeting some people for the first time. And also really good for getting to know these people and getting to know what moves them beyond just being on Twitter. But I've also met people in other forums, like talks that I've given both virtually and in person. Some of them I have met through common engagements, like sitting on boards. Some have recommended me for things, and I've got to meet them that way. So it's mainly through DMs, but also through all kinds of engagements outside of Twitter, where we just maintain those networks because we've been pulled together into one space, and we can finally get to see one another and talk about the things that move us beyond just tweeting.
Perfect, thank you. A couple of questions from Dr. Salvaggio. The first one is, I understand from data analytics colleagues that Twitter remains oh so white. Should this change how we use the platform?
It remains white?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. No, I don't think it should. Because I think, and this is going to sound controversial, but that's because I'm trying to sort of get through this question while thinking about the question. I think the people who should be listening are mainly white. And I don't think there's any other forum that allows me to actually communicate ideas about what white people should be listening to. That's better than Twitter. I used to be on Facebook, but there's too much noise on Facebook, so I got out of it. And you don't want to sort of dig into, Facebook and what it represents in our society. But Twitter gave me a voice, essentially. I had a voice before, but it was a voice that wasn't able to reach anytime I wanted 23,000 people. And many of the people who follow me are white people. And they've not run away yet. And in the past year, I have tweeted a lot about race, about politics, about inequity, and they listen, they engage, they understand, and I've encountered some real allies on this platform, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a wonderful thing because I did not have that voice before. I think the biggest thing I actually suffer as an academic is, I'm the first and only Black person ever recruited in my faculty. It's over 100-year history as a full-time law professor. And, every year I encounter students, but the most I ever encounter would be about in the hundreds. I used to not be invited to anything because I was invisible to a lot of people. And in the past year or so, I've been in some rooms and on some platforms that were enabled by my Twitter presence that have allowed me to actually communicate messages that nobody would have ever asked me to talk about or nobody will listen to. So I think it's a good thing. And I think it's good that people who are mostly on it are people who should be listening to the things that people like me have to share on Twitter? Yeah, those are my thoughts on that. That's a great question. I have to reflect on it more, but those are my initial thoughts on that.
Great. And her second question is, what of the real possibility of social media, of the social media echo chamber, strategies to keep your feed balanced?
Yeah. I remember tweeting one time, this was a long time ago, in response to someone who had come on to criticize me that, on something, I don't remember what the criticism was. And I remember tweeting, please leave me alone. This is my echo chamber. I actually don't think that's a bad thing. From my own analytics, I don't think the people who follow me are just people who agree with me. As a matter of fact, I think majority of them are not people who agree with me, especially on my politics, which is pretty left and very, very, very left. And whenever the way I test that is if I tweet something that along those lines, I usually get people who are more to the center, like, we're gonna let this one pass, or they'll start sending me messages like, I respect you, but I don't agree with you, things like that. And so I get a sense that, people follow you for different reasons. There are people who follow me because they like how I comment on my commentary on race, or like my commentary on health law, but they disagree with me on politics. So it's a mixed crowd. And there are people who follow me because they just like to hate what I tweet, which is fine too. I've had arguments with those people too. But I think the majority of people are people who would actually agree with me if we were to meet in person and talk about issues. And that's not a bad thing, because we need to support each other and we need to keep ourselves informed about these issues while being open to criticism. Now, how can one make sure that you don't just, you don't remain in this echo chamber and then your message loses impact because you're talking to people who already agree with you? I think there's two ways you can do that. The first is to focus a lot more on just sharing information. Even people who disagree with you appreciate good information. So for example, the whole debate about whether the chief medical officer of health is an advisor or is independent, I did a lot of work on that. And all of that was just informed by what the law says, right? So whether you agree with me or not, you can't deny that the information I just shared with you is accurate. And that's one way to sort of do that, to make sure that you're getting a lot of people who are looking at this and saying, well, we can relate to that. The other way is through humor. People love laughing about stuff, even if they don't agree with it. You can communicate in a way that people will go, well, I hate this guy, but that's kind of funny. So I'm going to like it, even though I don't really like his guts. But also to sometimes challenge people in that echo chamber. A lot of my tweets, especially when I tweet about inequity and race, really does not cut anyone any slack. I'm talking about it as someone who's affected and as someone who lives that, and it's my lived experience. And, the only friends I have when I'm tweeting about those kinds of things are people who are willing to meet me where I am. In many ways, I see myself as somebody who's very irreverent. I think it's probably my biggest strength and my biggest weakness, if you will, is that I will approach issues as I see them, not as people want me to see them. And there's a bit of that, you can sense in what I talked about in terms of how my Nigerian community is responding to my tweets criticizing the justice minister, is that at the end of the day, what I want to do is put out a message. And, it might be that you're somebody who agrees with me, but if you do put out something that I don't think is proper, I'm going to challenge it. One example will be a tweet, if I can remember this correctly, there was a colleague of mine who's a friend and, who's very, close to me politically, who would agree with everything, like 90% of the things I say, tweeted about how the justice minister, is ineffective because he was trained in Nigeria, and suggesting that if he had not been, the Nigerian educational system is inferior, and that if he had been trained in Canada, things would have been different. And I didn't even struggle. I didn't even waste a minute. I just responded that that's actually not, that's inappropriate and potentially racist. You can't say that. You just can't say that because you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been to Nigeria, you don't know what the educational system is. It produces people like me also. The Justice Minister is just being stupid with the suggestion of pepper spray. That doesn't mean you don't taint Nigerian institutions for that reason. But also, we have people who are trained in Canada who are part of the political system. And I can, my fingers are not enough to name all these people who are messing up in all kinds of ways. And we don't blame the Canadian educational system for that. And then the person DM'd me and said, you should have DM'd me about this. I'm like, no, you tweeted it. So I had to tweet a response for the whole world to see, right? And I think you should be fearless in that way. You really shouldn't think, oh, this person is in my social circle or in my Twitter circle. When somebody puts out an idea like that, which can be very dangerous, you have to challenge it. And that's kind of thing that somebody who doesn't agree with you will see and maybe feel, okay, maybe this person is really not, trying to play to one side or the other. Maybe they're just seeing the issues as they see them and try to respond as they see those issues. So that's a very long-winded answer to that, but I think irreverence helps as well. Even though I've been criticized for not being reverent, I guess.
Okay, our next question from Heather is, I always love your tweets. How do you deal with criticism without letting it distract you? And then the second part of the question is, also, has a tweet ever surprised you when it's gone viral?
Okay. How do you deal with criticism? I think the shortest answer I can give to that is not to take yourself too seriously. There's a danger in thinking that everything that comes out of your head is correct. I'm very well aware I'm on a forum where people's careers have been made and destroyed. And so I think very carefully about, I have a lot of tweets in my drafts that will never go out. That's one thing. You have to be really, mindful of how you're tweeting. But the best way to deal with criticism is to acknowledge it and respond honestly to it. If I tweet something that offends someone, I don't react by saying, you shouldn't have taken offense. I react by apologizing. People have different reasons why they get offended by stuff. And then I explain, because it's 250 words or whatever, or characters or whatever, sometimes the meaning might not come across. If I think an explanation is what a person needs, but if they don't need an explanation, I just apologize. Fortunately, that hasn't happened a lot. I've rarely had missteps, in part because I do some self-editing behind the scenes. But I also have people around me who remind me not to take myself too seriously. So usually when there's a criticism, I will discuss it with some trusted colleagues. What do you think about this criticism? And they will usually say, well, they're right, or I don't think that's. So they give me some sense of what to make of the criticism. And there's my wife, of course, who gets to hear a lot about my Twitter adventures, and who will, usually, because she understands me so well, will say, yeah, you kind of went too far there, or you probably need to sort of deal with it this or that way. So I get a lot of advice. As people who look at my tweets have increased, I talk to a lot of people to sort of check that. But I try not to think that the criticism is not appropriate, or that, I should take offense that somebody criticized me. I think that's just silly. If somebody criticizes you, and if they do that in a way that invites discussion, you should engage. if they're offended, you should apologize. And it should, mean the apology. It should be a well-intentioned apology. And if they are trolls, just looking to get a rise out of you, you block. Second part of the question was, what was it again? The second part of the question.
Has a tweet ever surprised you when it's gone viral?
Yeah, a few that I kind of, I mean, I don't know if I've had any viral tweets. I've had tweets that maybe within the Alberta Twitter community, you could say they've gone viral. Yes, I've had a few. I can't recall any off the top of my head. I've had a few where I tweeted them because I wanted a chuckle for myself. It's kind of like you're thinking out loud. I read something, I'm like, oh, this is what is in my head right now. That's a funny take on what I just read. And like most people, I'll tweet it out and go, well, now that I've written it out, it's actually not that funny. And then people start to react to it in all kinds of ways, and then to pick up on it, and then laugh about it and tweet their own reactions to it. I'm like, really? I didn't think it was that funny after tweeting it, but okay, I guess it is. So I've had a few like that. I can't recall any off the top of my head, but there have been tweets where it's usually tweets where I'm making fun of some politician or public official. Surprises me how much people actually relate to sarcastic tweets directed at Justin Kenya and co. So.
Okay, next question's from Sarah. What do you think constitutes harassment on Twitter? If a person has a large following, should they refrain from replying or to quote retweeting bad takes from similar accounts to keep them from being dogpiled by their 100,000 followers? And does replying to bad takes cause more harm than good by increasing their reach?
Wow. Oh, great questions. Yes, and small no. So yes, I think with an increase in number of your followers comes great responsibility. I tweet differently now from when I started tweeting, and I had like 200 followers. I think if you have a significant number of followers, you should really be careful about what you amplify. And there's of course a need to challenge some of these ideas, but in challenging them, you're also giving visibility to the source. And it's always a struggle. And there's all kinds of ways, I've learned over the years on how to do this. One is, the one I think is optimal, if everyone knows who you're talking about, is not to retweet it, just criticize it. So the example with my Mado tweet, right? I didn't retweet the pepper spray thing. I might have in some other tweet, but with that, if you just tweet something, everyone knows who I'm talking about. They know the pepper spray thing. They can get the message without having to see, especially for people who have seen it before and who find it hurtful, then they don't have to engage with the original source of the tweet. But you also don't give the person who tweeted it the views and potential followers who agree with him. So that's one way. The other way, people have used and I've seen on Twitter is to do a screenshot of the tweet and then respond to that. So you're not retweeting the actual tweet. That can also minimize the follow through, even though it's not as effective as the first thing. But I tend to ignore anybody who is tweeting something that amounts to harassment or hate if that person is not influencing a lot of people. So if you don't have a lot of followers, because what it does is it actually drives attention to them, and it might actually increase the number of people who see those tweets. So as a rule, I generally will not react. Now I'm starting to do that now, where if I look at your profile and if you just join Twitter and you have like less than 5 followers, I consider that to be a troll account. I just either mute or block. If you have anywhere in the region of like less than 1,000 followers, I'm really being careful about how I react to you. But if you have 100,000 followers, you just said something, you're somebody who's an authority, within the province, who's well regarded, who's a good source of information normally, and I have information that's contrary to what you've tweeted, I will respond to that, because I think that that is public debate. It creates a balance, and people can decide which information they're going to follow or respond to. Was there a second part to that question too?
No, I think you answered all the parts of the question.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, now we have a new question. Next one's from David. Are you ever frustrated that social media occupies too much of headspace away from work or other activities?
No, not for me, at least. And I know it's kind of, given how much I tweet, this might be difficult for people to stuff accept, but it doesn't. And the reason for that is that I have decided this is the platform I'm using. So I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on LinkedIn, I'm not on Facebook. So I'm not spread thin. I'm not trying to sort of manage all of these social media accounts. I only just have one social media account that I use, and that's platform that I use, and that's Twitter. But Twitter is, it can get to the point where that's all you're doing. But for me, it hasn't been, because I have over time, and I wasn't always good at this, I have over time found a way to not let it take over my life, right? So I now force myself to put the phone down. As with most things that can be addictive, you have to find a way to sort of get around it. But we're also living in unusual times. We're living in a time where this is the only way I can see myself contributing to public debate right now. It'll be different if all of this goes away. If COVID goes away, if the government changes, if there's less racism in the world, if the climate emergency, if all of these things were to abate, then I can go back to talking about recipes and whatever it is that I was talking about before. And I can do that in the way I did it before, which is maybe tweet once or twice a day. Any day that I wake up, there's a provincial government trying to destroy the healthcare system, and that's what I study. And there's things happening throughout the day that require commentary. And that commentary on Twitter leads to media commentary. And this is kind of academic I want to be right now. So I actually see it as work. And I like that it's actually occupying my headspace right now, because it helps me think through these things. It helps me sort of put the message out, how people react to it. It's helped me think of, things to write about. Over the course of the past year and a half, Lauren Hardcastle and I have written over 20 op-eds. We've written about 5 or 6 papers. All of these things emerging from conversations that started out on Twitter. We'll tweet something, somebody will say, well, it's not peer reviewed. We're like, okay, we'll show you. We're going to write something and make it peer reviewed, so that we're serious about it. And so it's actually been very good for my academic work. And I like that it's occupying my headspace, but it would be bad if nothing was happening and I was spending all my time on Twitter. And I think even now, it is good to have boundaries and limits. And so I've implemented some of those to help myself not be caught up in the Twitter world. So here's some rules I have for managing my time on Twitter. Don't tweet first thing in the morning, at least not until you've checked your blood pressure and had a morning coffee. And that is actually, I'm not making a joke. I actually do have to check my blood pressure before I go on Twitter, because it raises my blood pressure. So that's the first thing. Put away the phone if you're engaged in anything to do with another human being, whether it's my kids or my wife, or I'm meeting you for coffee. If I meet you for coffee, you will not see my phone in front of me for once, and it's not coming out. I had coffee with a colleague yesterday. We talked for about 2 hours, didn't check my phone at all. So that's something I've implemented. I tweet in bursts. You're likely to see like 10 tweets from me in rapid succession, and I'm gone for hours, right? Don't react to everything in the replies, right? That's actually the biggest thing, because that's what draws you back in. The need to try and, so I only respond if it's, somebody's asking a question, you know, so where do I find information on this? You know, so I am very selective about how I respond. And most importantly, put it away at 9 o'clock, at least for me. 9 o'clock, unless there's, you know, something that's breaking in the world, I'm starting to like in the evenings. And the best way to do that is to find a TV show that you can binge watch at 9 o'clock and then fall asleep. And for me, it's Game of Thrones. I'm rewatching Game of Thrones. And once my wife and I have a date at like 9 o'clock, we turn on Game of Thrones, and before you know it, it's 11 p.m. and I'm falling asleep, and that's it.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here. First one from Heather, 2 questions. So I love your spirit. How often do you tweet? And do you have different accounts for different subjects? You mentioned recipes.
Right. So like I said before, I tweet in bursts, and I tweet when there's something topical to tweet about. Or if I'm doing something, you know, I think is interesting and I think people want to hear about, you know, that's the other thing that surprises me, that people react to some things that I tweet where it's just like, I'm talking to myself, you know, like I'm tweeting about like foods that I haven't eaten, Canadian foods I haven't eaten, that I just discovered, like wrapping apple in candy, you know, I don't get that, you know. So I tweet about it and people, there's like this huge reaction. It comes close to trending in Alberta, and felt like, oh, we got to find you and feed you with all these Canadian foods. I enjoy those tweets because, you know, it's, people engage with those kinds of tweets. And those can be tweets I tweet any time of day, you know, but the tweets that are meant to inform and are in my area of knowledge, and or that are meant to sort of criticize or critique things that are happening, those I tend to tweet in bursts. I just have like, you know, a thread or a succession of tweets where I talk about it, and then I just sort of step away. Usually I tweet in the mornings and in the early evenings. Those are the times that I usually do my tweeting. And then, you know, throughout the day, I might be reacting to tweets or just, you know, I don't know, tweeting about other things that I like. What was the second part of the question again?
If you have different Twitter accounts.
Oh, different accounts. I used to. So initially, when I joined Twitter, I had an account for my courses that I teach, which I've discontinued. And the reason for that was so that my students could follow along with the tweets. You know, if I find interesting stuff, I could share it through Twitter and my students could follow along. So it was a teaching tool for me for a while, and then I stopped doing that because I found out that many students were not on Twitter, and so it didn't create for being able to reach everyone. And I didn't want my students to get some information and others did not get the same information. So I started to use things like eClass. Then I had a tweet called African Boy because I had social media accounts everywhere, and I chose African Boy as and I had a Twitter account called African Boy. That was soon taken over by all kinds of people sending me spam. I don't know what people, yeah, started getting like weird followers because of the handle. So I discontinued it. And then it was on the African Boy account that I actually, you know, started to share things like recipes. And I like fashion a lot. And one of the things about having a professional Twitter account, which is the only one I have now, my professional Twitter account, is you have to be, you know, you can't tweet about some of the things that actually, some of the other things that are interesting in life. And fashion is a big part of it, not just fashion in terms of clothes that I wear. I just like talking about fashion. And the African Boy account allowed me to, you know, talk about fashion and talk about fashion articles that I've read. I like food, I like cooking, and posting pictures of food and the foods I have encountered, the foods I've made. doesn't quite work well for Twitter. And it's the one reason I miss Instagram so much, so very much. And the African Boy account was also good for that, but it's no longer in existence. I only have one Twitter account now, and that's the professional Twitter account. So it's very limiting. Don't even get me started on my love of watches and how I can talk about my love of watches on my professional account. Anyway, that's I wish I had a different Twitter account on that, a pseudonym that allows me to talk about stuff that's not related to Alberta politics and race issues and health law and science policy, but I don't. And thank you for loving my spirit. Thanks. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, next question from Raphael. Related to the top question, what are some strategies you use to disconnect from the social media presence you have? And do you find that it's hard for you to stay away from your phone?
No. I think one of the things about living in modern contemporary society and having a phone in your hand is we're all in many ways addicted to our phones. I know. So my denial of the addiction doesn't mean I am not. It is the thing that I hold the most in my hand every day. But I have tried to reduce that in the ways I've described, which is, to keep myself focused on, I think it used to be before that when I had our social media accounts, Facebook especially, because Facebook was the only place where I had my relatives in Nigeria. I'm the only one in my extended family who's out of the country. And so that was the way of connecting with them. And that connection, in addition to, being on Instagram and being on LinkedIn and being on Twitter, can lead to a situation where you're basically tethered to your phone all day. And being able to let go of those and actually do it was a big part of actually reducing the time I spend on social media. The other strategy, I've already discussed some other strategies, but in addition to those, I think trying to always remembering that there are other things that make you happy, that you'll have less time for if you spend that much time around your phone, is a good thing. One of the things I really enjoy is forums like this, right? And if I could be involved in many of them as possible, I also like talking to people, and trying to stay connected that way actually keeps me away from my phone. As I said before, if I'm meeting you in person, you're not going to see my phone around me. But also, my family life is very important to me, as for most people. And I have to model good phone behavior for my kids. And we insist that our kids not spend too much time around technology. So we have to model that behavior for them. So we try very much not to be tethered to the phone when they're around, because that way when they ask you to play on the Nintendo Switch, you can say you can do that for 1 hour and that's it. And they can relate to that because, you model the same kind of behavior for them by not sitting in front of your phone all the time. But my kids also are very good for this. They, my 7-year-old will come up to you and go, "You said you were not going to be on the computer." Like, okay, thanks for calling me out. I'm going to step away from the computer now and go play Monopoly or something with you. So they're good for that. They actually sort of remind you that, this is not the only life you have and you have to step away from it. But I've also tried not to, because as I said, I have this sort of work-life balance I'm trying to create. I've tried not to let the life part of it be social media. Actual living is good for that. And I have a lot of interests, things that I actually really enjoy doing. You should see me spending time with like watches or sneakers, polishing them. That can take hours. You won't see me checking my phone when I'm doing that. So trying to invest in other hobbies helps as well.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for you in the chat.
Those are great questions.
Awesome. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to either say them out loud or throw them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. I know it's everyone's lunch break, so we appreciate your time. And we hope to see you at future events.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Those are great questions. I can actually believe that I didn't think we were going to show up for this to listen to me talk about Twitter. And this has been a very, very enjoyable and engaging session for me. So thank you for your generosity in terms of giving your time and contributing to this. I really appreciate it. And of course, thanks to Manisha, who has, I don't know where you get all the energy from. And this is a great initiative, but thank you.
Leaders of coffee.
Yes, that helps. Thanks, everyone.